All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's advanced training session. Our topic, I've tweaked the topic a bit. It's instead of just talking about pawn sacrifice in the middle game, I've tweaked it to pawn sacrifice in the middle and end game. Yeah, so and then in terms of games, I've actually resorted to some of the more classical games that we don't often refer to, but these are the games like the late 1800s, early 1900s, and so forth. And I think you guys might even be amazed at how brilliant some of these games were. And there certainly are lessons to be learned from it. Ravan, you might remember sitting in about a month or two ago, sitting in a lecture with International Master Watu Kobes. He covered this topic, and he dealt with some different aspects, with some different games and so forth. But so you'll see now that I'm not going to be copying his games, but I'm looking at it from a completely different angle as well. So some of the theory concepts that I will be covering is related to pawn structure. And here you guys will actually see it is how important it is to be focusing on pawn formations. Second theory that will come through in the games is the fact that certain squares on the board can be regarded as nerve centers, and that there's a need for you to be focusing on positional advantages. Then another concept that comes through is the importance of utilizing key squares. Those key squares you will see in the games are ideal squares for outposts. All right. And then another concept which we've spoken about several times in the past is having a plan B as well, not only just focusing on one plan. So you will see how the player switches from one side of the board to the other. The role of pawns also comes through very strongly in some of the games that we'll be touching on. I'll be commenting on them as we move along. But you also see, importantly, one of the big roles for pawns is the fact that pawns are able to restrain and they influence the mobility of your pieces. All right, and then we're looking at the actual pawn sacrifices occurring in the middle game or in the end game. There's also one, I almost said 1.5 games, whereby you will see the idea of having a pawn march or pawn row list taking place, and then finally the pawn sacrifice as part of your vision in wanting to achieve a positive game result. All right, as is usual, feel free to stop me at any time or comment at any time. Are there any questions or comments at this stage from you guys? Any comment? All right. Can I just for the sake of me getting to know my audience, Galaxy A30, who are you? Can you just identify yourself, please?
Hi, Senzi Dlamini.
Okay. All right. If you can see there, Senzi, if you click by participants, you can just, there's an option for rename, and then you can just type your name. It certainly will help me as the presenter, so that, you know, if you're able to do that, it will be much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so So guys, I'm going to let me know if you are able to see my screen now.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, we can.
The first game. The first game is a game played between a guy with a surname of Schlechter, and it's Carl Schlechter and W. John. If you look at the date, it was played in 1905. All right, I think many of us at that stage were but some concept hovering in space. Okay, for tonight, I'm not really going to be closing the moves much, but I want us to discuss it as we move along. All right, so the first move being D4, D5, and C4. So for this game, I want you guys to take very, very careful note of the pawn structure. All right, so knight C3, and then we have the F5 move by black. A bit of a surprise. Is there anybody that can identify immediately what type of pawn structure black is looking at?
The stone wall, I think
The
it's called.
stone wall. Correct. Thank you, Rowan. Okay, so like I said, it's a bit of an unusual move. What is the drawback of the F5 move that black played?
It weakens the E5 square.
Correct. And that's exactly what we were talking about, key squares. And immediately also that E6 pawn becomes a backward pawn. Okay. So, so with the F5, as Rowan said, the stonewall pawn formation, and its purpose is to create a strong support for the knight on E4. That is black's idea. And with the center made secure to play for an attack on the king side. Okay, so there are two drawbacks in the stone wall. One is, as was mentioned, the E5 square becomes weak and an enemy piece posted there cannot be driven away. So E5 is a strong candidate for an outpost for white. Okay. The second is the weakening of black's queen's bishop, the bishop on C8. As you can see there, it is very limited on that diagonal. All right. And whose range of action is actually dependent on the white squares. Okay, so having said that, let's just move on. Knight F3, white just continues with his normal development, and there you can once again see black's pawn formation. All right, there's a pawn chain happening, but look at how his bishop, light squared bishop, is actually already being more and more restricted. Okay, bishop goes to F4. Bishop E6, D6, sorry, and there you see white just continues as normal. Immediately black is making his plan to get his knight to E4. Okay, I'm just rolling on. The bishop goes to D6 with the intention of, do you guys think that is a good idea? The bishop going to D6. Why would you reckon, what is white's thinking for bishop to D3, sorry? Why not go to E2 so that he can move his bishop out to the H5 diagonal?
You want to discourage knight to E4.
Yes, he certainly wants to discourage knight to E4. Thank you, Daryl. The fact also that white recognizes the black's pawn formation, and white recognizes that his bishop is not, his light squared bishop is not going to be very effective with that pawn structure. So he's actually kind of preparing himself. The center might be closed, so therefore I am I'm happy to position my bishop on d3. If knight goes to e4, then white will exchange the knight with his bishop.
But then, Andrew, I don't understand. Then why would Black put his bishop on d6? Because that's his good bishop. Is he willing to exchange his good bishop?
Good question. He's actually limited in terms of his diagonals, because he cannot go to c5. If he's going to go to b4, he will be chased away via a3. And then he's kind of forced either to exchange that bishop on c3 or go all the way back to d6 or e7. All right, so white, you could almost say, is reluctant to exchange bishops immediately because it's an unforced exchange. Black, on the other hand, is happy to exchange his bishop and to focus on his knights attaining strong outpost squares.
Okay.
That's his whole idea. All right, so queen c7, there you can see him wanting to force the exchange, but very interesting move that white makes. You know, he sees black, adopting this pawn formation. And like I said, white was holding back from exchanging on d6. Look at the next move that white makes, g3. I mean, I think most players, and the analysts gave it as an exclamation mark, and it's g3 move. Most of us will not be playing g3 because we've been told that the double pawn is going to be bad. Now I need you guys to talk to me. Why would why would white opt for that move? What's his thinking?
He wants to open up the G file.
Yes. The second reason?
After the bishops gets exchanged, he'll have a pawn on f4 which clamps down on e5, so he can get his own knight on e5.
Correct, and it will also deter the advance of black's pawn to e5. Okay, and that in turn will keep the bishop shut out there on c8. Okay, thanks guys. So next move is castling, and interesting that white also castles in spite of possibly having an open G file. Right here, the knight comes to e4. Okay, it's again a question of unforced exchange. You do not want to improve your opponent's position by exchanging, so therefore keep the tension. Right. Queen b3 goes, and then king h8. What is the idea? Why would black want to go king h8 at such an early stage?
He wants to do a pawn push himself.
Say that again.
He would want to do a pawn push himself at some point down the G file.
Yes, correct. He'd want to do that, but there's some other reason as well.
To avoid a pin if the exchange is the knight gets exchanged and the pawn on d5 gets exchanged.
Correct.
So, okay.
Well spotted. If this king remains there, there's that pin. So then you will be looking at first an exchange on d5. Let's say e takes d5, and then black will exchange on e4. If f takes e4, and then knight takes e4, and then the d takes e4 cannot happen. Okay. But yes, it certainly does give you various options. So rook 8 to c1. Once again, I think you guys can see that there is a threat of exchanging on c takes d4, so that the rook can also have some type of indirect attack going with the queen being on c7. All right, oops, sorry, I don't know what I did there. I need to just scroll back up again. My apologies, guys. Okay, so we were there. Bishop takes e4, and now no longer the g pawn because of the king, but there is still now a huge presence on the e5 square. Immediately the queen moves over, and there goes your knight e5. Okay, now you guys can see that my comment that I inserted here is that the knight, which cannot be driven away by the pawns, is powerfully placed at e5, and that is one of the vital nerve centers of the chessboard. Right, when in my introduction about the theory and concepts that I will be covering, I spoke about nerve centers and having strong positional play, and here you can see it is quite evident. All right, so black's position is the inferior one at this point for two reasons. His black squares are weak. Okay, you guys agree with me? You can all see all his white squares are most of his pawns on the white squares. So black's his dark squares are weak. He doesn't have that bishop there, and that so it's weak greatly due to the absence of the bishop controlling those squares. And secondly, his queen bishop on c8 doesn't have much freedom of movement. It has very little freedom of movement. So since it is hemmed in by pawns that are occupying it. Okay. Any questions or comments that you guys have? Okay. So the next move, white goes, black goes queen e7. So here you can actually see that how the queen's been chased away. I mean, queen c7, queen f7, queen e7. So white has actually been forcing black to be moving the same piece, to be making wasted moves. And in terms of development, look at how that queen side is actually quite dormant. All right. Now, let's see, let the fun begin. Oh no, why am I doing that again? Let me just go back up. Okay, I went there. Bishop takes e4. It's all about timing. All right. Why does white now choose to get rid of the bishop? But as we said earlier, because of black's pawn structure, white's bishop becomes a liability. So he has the opportunity, therefore, to exchange his bishop, and he leaves black with a completely bad bishop. Okay. Next move for black, sorry, for white, immediately goes f3. All right. Do you guys think that's a good idea?
Yes, I think it's a good idea, because you are trying to undermine black's center, and if black ever captures, he's left with the backward e-pawn that you can pressure.
Okay, but Rawan, do you not think that we are helping black to undouble his e-pawn?
I think his e-pawn is quite strong. If we just leave it there, there's no way to actually get rid of it. It controls a lot of space and a lot of the center. So if it moves, I think the backward e pawn is way more of a target than his doubled pawns.
Correct. Okay. I want you guys to also notice that there is still this tension in the center there. White is not keen to be exchanging. He's waiting for his opponent to do the exchanging. Also, he's inviting black to take on f3 so that he can then take with his rook, and it affords him the opportunity to double his rooks.
Sorry, Andrew, just a question from my side.
Yes.
Did black capture correctly? If you can just go back, move back.
Black,
pawn takes,
at this stage, I stopped with f3.
yeah, just go. Do you mind going back one more move before? One more move back. Yes, capturing that bishop. Did black capture correctly there?
Yes, he did. Because he wanted to give activity for his rook that's already on the F file. If he had to go with a D pawn, then you allowing white opportunity to build up an attack on the D5 square. So now just look at how many pieces, how many attackers will you be having on the D5 square? It will be 1, 2, 3 attackers. There's also the option to swing the rook across to D1 then. You see that?
Okay. Yes, I was just wondering, I mean, with that capture, does it also not allow black to then free up his bishop because it then becomes active?
The only way that he'll then be able to free his bishop is to play B6 and to bring his bishop to A6. But certainly, I think after, if he should take D takes E4, he might as well resign, because now you're inviting that attack on the D file, and it's an absolute, there's disaster going to happen for black on the D file. White has got all the space, he's got all the capacity. Black still has to develop his pieces. All right, and there's strong center pawn control. This rook will also be shut off here on the F file. Okay, he'll only either be able to bring his rook to F6 and swing across, or he'll have to then bring it there, and then he's still lagging on his queenside development. Okay, but I appreciate it. Well spotted that that comment there. So let's see, went with the F3 came up and took. Now, notice what white does. He doesn't take immediately, because that pawn is lost. Let's build an attack. Why rook E1? Can you guys see some discovered attack that could end up happening, because now the exchange on D5 also becomes an option and a possible sacrifice with discovered attack? Okay, if he's going to be taking C takes D5, then black will kind of be forced to take with C6 takes D5. E6 takes D5 will be suicidal because of knight to G6. You see that, Rowan?
Yes, that's what I was about to say, is that the knight to G6 check.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Sorry for not giving you a chance to immediately respond. Queen C7, still not in a hurry, because that pawn on F3 is already lost. Let's keep up the pressure. Let's make strategic moves. Okay, rook on F8 is now suddenly under attack. So now the king comes back. So king H8 becomes almost like a wasted move from earlier. I almost want to say at this stage that white is playing very much a psychological game here. allowing black to make wasted moves all the time. He's just basically moving 2 or 3 pieces all the time. Finally, some activity on the queen side happens. All right, and now that almost seems like not a good idea because the queen is being shut off now with a b3 move, but that's important, inviting the exchange so that the pawns can still, you will then take b takes c4 and then still have a strong center. So I'm just rolling forward. Now you can see there, suddenly now you got 2 backward pawns. Okay, and I think it stands to reason that if b6 is played, then white will play b4. Okay. Players, I want you to also notice what's happening on d6. All right, you already have a strong outpost on e5, but imagine you end up getting another, the other knight position at d6. This is huge, and that bishop, the poor bishop, should I say, on c8, there's absolutely no plan. So queen to b2, I think that suddenly switching over from plan A to plan B, various options happening. The queen can come across. You can go to c2, and you can also then launch an attack on h7. Even if you come to c2, it gives you the option of wanting to push later on, after you've built up your position. There are so much that white can think of. Okay, who of you wants to take that bishop on d7 with your knight? You know that story of helping the guy out. So, yeah, there you go, queen c2 as I predicted. Doubling of the rooks I spoke about earlier was an option. Okay, black is just now finally positioning his pieces, but not really sure what white is going to do. Okay. I'm looking for a next move for white. Any suggestion? Nobody want to suggest a move for white. Shall we try g4, Rawan?
I was thinking about f5 or g4.
Okay. The
Let's try and
problem
make
that I'm
f5
having
work.
with f5 at the moment, and that's why I'm suggesting g4 first, is if we immediately push f5, we are suddenly activating that bishop. Because then you'll have 1 and 2 defenders there.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I could make it work tactically, but it doesn't seem to be.
Okay, so
giving
let's see,
anything, yeah.
and there goes g4. All right, g6 is could be a possibility to stop f5. Suddenly the bishop goes back, and that's the beauty of it. So white was actually confusing black thinking that there might be an f5 push, but it switched over. It allowed rook to h3, okay, with checkmate threat. So now g6 comes, and interestingly, notice what white now does is he switches over from kingside to queen side. He's now drawn the attention of black's pieces to the king side. Black's pieces were fast asleep earlier on the queen side. So now suddenly there's activity going to happen on the queen side as well. Right, I'm just rolling, and there you can actually see what's happening. We still have to see a pawn sacrifice coming through. All right, black is just pure defense at this stage. I think it's obvious you'd want to maybe push g5. Knight goes to e3. covering various options. You didn't just want to push immediately the white pawn to g5 because then the queen would have gone to f5. Okay. Also, what do you guys think? What was the purpose of the a4 move earlier? Senzi?
I think trying to create activity on the queen side, blocking him from thinking of advancing. So?
Okay, so to stop b5 being played, but also with white possibly wanting to push there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and maybe also to, I don't know, maybe to confuse the opponent, because obviously focus is focusing on the attack on the king side, right? And then if, for instance, he becomes vulnerable on the queen side, there's also place for instance, to move all of his pieces to focus on the potential attack on the king. Then he can be left weaker on that end.
Okay, thank you. But what I want you to notice, a4 is also stopping this knight from going to b5. Okay, so now with black having that problem of not being able to develop that knight to b5, I want you guys now to see the big problem that black has. He's got no place for his bishop and his knights to really move around. You might as well remove those 6 points from the board. Okay, position might be equal, but with those two pieces not really being active, black is totally strangled at the moment. He doesn't really have much of a plan. Okay, so there, the queen goes back, and there comes your g5. Okay, notice that how important this knight is on e3, because now with a hole there, after g5, the rook, there's no other piece that can really go there. Okay. So I think that was to be expected. Where is that knight heading to? Knight to g4.
It's heading to f6.
f6
or
or
h6.
Rawan, also h6, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, both of them.
Okay, so the bishop comes back, and there we go. King into the corner, and why queen e2? What do you guys think? Why did white play queen e2? What's his plan?
That attack potentially on e5.
Correct. So the idea is to move this, to reroute this knight to g4 to f6, and that the queen can go to e5. Okay, but also keep an eye on b5, eh? As well. So let's see how it unfolds. And there we go. As I predicted, knight to g4, queen e5. Okay, and there the rook comes back. Trying to exchange queens. Should we exchange queens or not? What do you guys think?
Not at this stage.
All right. If you're under attack, suggestion is not to exchange, eh? So keep the tension. Black is happy to exchange.
Question.
Yeah.
And why did he not move his queen there? Because exchanging it is not ideal in this instance, because the white queen is much stronger. I would have preferred to move it there rather than leaving it to be exchanged.
Yeah, if the I'm also surprised why white didn't move back. But now just watch as we roll forward. The knight, white knew that the knight was heading to f6. And now look at the pawn structure. Look what's going to happen. It's a case of him wanting to, although he's exchanging his most attacking piece, but he wants to simplify the game because he knows that black's pieces are cramped. They're limited for space. So it was just a matter of time.
Okay.
So let's just see. There we go. And now, if he's going to take with the knight on f6, will not be a good idea. So they're doubling of the rooks. And now, do we take with the e pawn? Do we take with the g pawn? None of the two. Keep the tension. Invite rooks exchange. Here we go. And there's your passed pawn. Okay. And look at it. It's not just a clear, it's not just a passed pawn, but it is quite far advanced as a passed pawn. It's already on the 6th rank. We know that the 7th rank is being controlled by the knight. And what is the other most important factor relating to this passed pawn? Who can tell me?
Black's king's actually in stalemate. His king can't actually get activated into the game.
Yes, the king is in stalemate. Very good observation. What else? What's very important when it comes to a passed pawn? Yes, Senji?
I think it advances immediately and making that rook redundant because the rook has to protect the pawn. And it's going to be locked by a knight. And then that white rook is now active. The black rook will be inactive after going to protect
Correct.
the pawn from.
Okay. The other important thing is when you have a passed pawn, get your rook behind your passed pawn. And this is immediately evident here with white. Okay, so let's first check him, free the king, and then there's a reason why we...
Andrew there, sorry, wondered why the continuation. Maybe if you don't mind moving a move back before he moves the knight.
That one?
Yeah, just before the knight moves from h6. Instead of, did he not push the pawn?
The rook will just go to f8. And white actually wanted to position bring his knight back to e5, and you're going to see the threat of either the bishop or there's a fork threat of the king and rook being attacked via f7.
Oh,
okay, so if you roll back, just look at that one now. Do you now see what's happening there? So there's a double attack. There's there's that threat and there's that threat.
I see. Okay.
Whereas if you didn't, if you had kept the knight on h6 and just pushed on f7, the rook would have been stuck there. There would have been a longer route for you to get to f8. Okay, so interesting that he didn't, that he moved the king to g2 now instead of pushing on h7, on f7, because then the king will just go to f8. Okay, so let's go forward with our knights, with our pawns, and we're also not in a hurry to exchange the bad bishop. So now you can actually see this king going all the way, right? Okay, here we come back, keeping the pieces picked up there, and here we're coming back to the plan B. All right, so it's basically the second time, if not the third time that white has done this throughout this match, that he's drawing black's pieces. So now b5, and that's going to be your breakthrough. And it is at this point that black resigned, because after this exchange, you can actually see the rook capturing that and coming through this way. Okay. Any comments or questions from you guys? Okay, I'm moving over to the next game. It's a game played between Janowski and Capablanca, played in 1916. In this game, you will actually see that Capablanca was the former world champion, very brilliant Cuban player. He shows his consummate mastery of all styles of play. The subtle strategy initiated by his 10th move, we will see what move number 10 for Capablanca entailed, could have been a profound concept of another former world champion, Emmanuel Lasker. The powerful restraining moves by the pawns that I spoke about in our theory and concepts that we're covering for tonight are worthy of another former player, Philidor. He was known for that. And then there's also the switch attack from one side of the board to the other. It reminds you of a certain Bourgal-Lubov attack. And then there's also a sacrifice on the queen side that takes place. Okay, so let's see. D4 is played. Knight F3, and name of the opening? Ravan, you normally sharp with the opening names.
Isn't this just like a Queen's Gambit? But
Queen's Gambit, yes, but with the next move for black.
that's the Slav.
Slav defense, there we go. Okay, so the purpose of this opening the Slav defense is basically to support the center pawn. Okay, without locking in the queen bishop, which normally happens after e6 is played. So the drawback to this line is that an early development of the bishop tends to weaken the queen side. All right, so just rolling forward the continuation. Now, there's an invitation to exchange queens very early in the game. Is it wise? Capablanca is playing black, and he's now ending up inviting the exchange of queens. He ended up winning this game, in fact. But how is it possible? Because now he immediately gets a double pawn. So what did black do that white couldn't sort of overcome that position? Okay, what did white do wrong? So let's see, c takes d5. At this stage, I mean, if you look at this position, you'd ask yourself, after 8 moves, look at white's queenside pawn structure. How on earth does look at black's queenside pawn structure? How on earth does white end up winning this game? All right. Black's queenside pawns are weak. But what is the strength of black's position in return for these weak pawns that he has?
Is it
He's
active
got
play?
pressure on the 8th file.
He's got active open files for his rooks. Okay, Senzi, sorry, what was that you said?
I was saying active play.
Active play, correct. Okay, so let's see. I mean, if you look at it, a double pawn should be regarded as a single pawn. All right, so you'd say advantage to white at this stage. Only problem is that white's bishops are still undeveloped. There they come out, and why is black reluctantly only developing his bishops to the second rank. White, sorry, I'm getting my colors mixed up tonight. All right, now let's look at move number 10 for black. Bishop to d7. What was so, there's a double exclamation mark. What was so brilliant about that? Okay. Here you guys see that not only does Capablanca undevelop the bishop, but he locks in his bishop with the very next move, e6. He locks in the bishop. So black intends to continue by playing knight e5, pushing the pawn to b5. And you see that the pawns are actually then end up being protected by the bishop, and then knight to c4. Okay, the knight would then occupy an important outpost on c4 and be strongly supported by pawns. It is true that white could capture the knight, but the recapture will only undouble black's pawns, okay? And that will then leave him with additional center control. So let's see how it works out. It's quite a long, slow strategy there. Okay, so if you're rolling back, if you're actually going forward now, what options do white have? He's got a problem here. He cannot move this rook from the A1 square. If he's going to want to move the rook, he'll have to play A3, and then it's going to weaken it further, and it's going to create gaps in his position. Okay, so he's very limited at this stage. And there, like I said, A3 because the rook needs to move. And now knight A5. Immediately he takes advantage of that. What are the threats now? Knight A5. What is white threatening to do? Black threatening to do?
Knight B3.
Knight B3, correct. And then also the outpost of C4. Okay. Once again, like we saw in the previous game, F5 comes. Right, so you have a bit of a stone wall also happening there. What would the reason be for F5? What's the thinking?
I'm thinking to play F4.
F4, yes, correct. There's also the other option. Look at the situation here. You have four of white's pieces that are based on the queen side. So black could also you could also consider playing after that F5, consider coming with a G5, swing his rooks across, etc. And look at these bishops that are pointing in this direction as well. Okay. And then this bishop here is also supporting, could come via A4 to a much better diagonal and target the C4, the E4 square. Right, so therefore your F4 threat is stopped by G3, and there's B5 suddenly coming. So black is actually playing both sides of the board, confusing white as to what his immediate priority is. And now you can prepare yourself for the outpost. Okay. If he takes there, and there's your undoubling. Sure, look at how far that pawn has traveled from A6. From A7 to B6 to B5 to C4. Okay, and now you've got a beautiful advanced pawn structure as well happening there. Okay, that was to break the pawn chain, the pawn structure. The rupture move came, and I think you could expect e5 to happen. I want to get to a situation whereby we see a pawn sacrifice happening. Okay, very interesting players that you see white. All of our white pawns are on dark squares. Okay. Black on the other hand, he's got his bishop pair, pawns on white squares except for the g7 pawn. And there's utilizing the open files. Knight f3 comes, and is that a good idea? Because there's going to be an overlap here of pawns on the king side if he exchanges. All right, so just going forward, I want to get to the next few moves. You're going to see how it becomes interesting. Okay, so clearly, players, you can see how black starts penetrating white's territory. And there's the opportunity to double up rooks. So white is starting to defend on that. Rook 8 to g8, doubling up of the rooks. Bishop e1. And now, why b4? That's the pawn sacrifice that we were looking for. I need you guys to comment. Why does black choose to play b4?
That queen side is weak, so by opening up him to take the pawn, so he can recapture it anyway, because it's going to be a double pawn, but it comes at a cost, because there's also that strong pawn on c4, which can advance.
Okay. But why the pawn sacrifice? Thanks for that, Sinzi. Rawan?
I'm thinking it's a good way to pretty much break down white's queen side, because black has locked down the king side and he's got all the pressure on the king side. So as soon as white captures, he's got no counter play on the queen side, as well as he can, if he wants, bring his rook to b8 and start pressurizing the doubled pawns on b4 and b2.
Yeah, and maybe just to add there, Andrew, what you mentioned about the pawns being on black squares, if that black bishop gets exchanged, so all those pawns are weak, they like to pawn.
Okay. I want to show you guys. Look at what I'm doing. The bishop on d7 going to a4 to c2 and e4. Can you now see how powerful that is? And then you've got the doubling of the rooks on the g file, pointing at g2, and once that bishop comes there, there's additional pressure on the g2 square. Guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the long term. That's the big idea behind that sacrifice. It clears the diagonal for the queen bishop, whose next few moves will actually decide the game. The 10th move, if you go back, that was that bishop there, moving it to d7 to protect the pawns on e6 and so on. And now suddenly the activation. Okay, so let's see. A takes d4. There goes your bishop. Bishop's on his way to c2, gaining time there by attacking the rook. and then to e4. So the rook goes to a1, bishop still goes to c2, bishop g3 to cut off those other rooks, and what a beautiful outpost now. Okay, king comes to f2, and now h5 comes. Okay, what's the next move being planned? Why h5? What's black's next move being planned?
Isn't it? He's threatening to like take the knight and play h4, winning the piece.
Yeah,
No,
he
no,
might
that's
even
not winning
just
the
play. Yeah, yes,
Yeah, it
so
is.
you're
It is.
absolutely correct. And then that bishop will almost be trapped.
Yes.
Okay, there we go, and boom. Okay, there's still the pin now of the bishop on e7. So the bishop takes, and look at that. Okay, takes. So there's some fireworks happening. And interestingly, black knew there was a discovered attack going to happen. Why was he not worried about it?
There are no pieces on black square, maybe.
Well spotted, Senzi. No pieces on the black squares. Okay, including the two rooks and the king. And so therefore, that discovered attack would amount to nothing. Okay, and rook goes to a8. If you want to take on a6, you can do that. On e6, you can do that. King to h7. Notice that black didn't fall for the last trick from white. Okay. If you had to go, I think if you had to go, you had to f7, you'd have this again the check there, and so forth. If you had to go to h5, it will be rook to h6 checkmate. So after king h7, that's when white resigned. Okay, you got that pass pawn there as well. And black's also got the exchange up. It's just a matter of time. All right, and I think the key strategy there was to shut out the pieces, and then that pawn sacrifice to open up the file when the timing was right. That was just perfect. It was too much for white to handle. Okay. Let's just go to our third game. I'm not going to comment much here because I'd want us to try and cover all the games. So I'm just rolling fast. This game it's another classic. Player Pillsbury and Goonsberg. Played in 1895. I told you I was digging at all the classical games. But I want you to, particularly for this game, I want you to particularly take note of the ending, okay, of this game. And then you can actually see what even the various pieces that are the way they're being maneuvered and so forth. I want you to actually see how white actually got, utilized different strategies here. Again, we have the Slav defense as Rawan pointed out earlier. Just rolling fast. Okay. Is that knight to e5, early knight to e5, move number 7? Is that a good idea, guys? What do you think? What's the plan? Okay, I'm just rolling forward quickly to again, you're seeing the stone wall structure there, Rowan. So now, bishop to e6. Why? What's the idea of black playing bishop to e6? Okay, obviously to strengthen the support, but what's the other key idea? What's the threat now happening? What is black threatening with his next move?
Is it knight takes c3?
Knight takes c3, yes, correct.
Because it's then the knight's attacking the queen and the bishop's attacking the bishop, so he has to recapture.
Okay, perhaps even before knight takes c3, bishop takes e5, because
yes.
that knight on e5 was protecting c4.
Fair enough, yes, yeah.
So first exchange on e5 and then exchange on c3, and then you gain the piece on c4. Okay? It's always dangerous to have an unprotected piece on the board. It invites, it invites itself to become a target. Okay, so the queen protects there, and suddenly there's being chased away. I'm not sure if this was a good idea for black to want him to give up his bishop. What do you guys suggest about, think about that? Because now then also that pawn, it depends on how black exchanges. That pawn could become vulnerable on b5. Because this bishop here is, look at how strong it is. So that's why I'm not convinced that it was the best idea. But anyway, queen's exchange takes, and now let's see what happens. Will you guys say, think is better off white or black? Looking at the current position.
You know, it's hard to say. It looks pretty even, but I think black. I like black, that black has the open file, and that because with transitioning into an endgame, that black's bishop might be better than white's bishop.
Yes.
But white has nice squares for his knight on e5 and c5, so it's hard to say who's better.
All right. I spoke about key squares at the start, yes. I'm going to get you now, Senzi, and so that you can clearly see that knight, which you correctly are pointing out there, Arwen. White has got beautiful options open for the knight to go to. Okay, Senzi, your comment?
I think white slightly, just because of where the king is placed. Because if we're gonna go into an end game here, the king doesn't castle, and just go on and help in whatever attack strategy that white chooses.
Correct. Okay. Notice white has not castled at this stage. Do you think it is important for him still to be castling?
No, because it's like I said, we're transitioning into endgame. We'd rather keep a king in the center in an endgame.
Absolutely. So he will have the advantage because compared to black's king on g8, white would then have gained some mileage, and that's exactly what has happened. Now he keeps his king there in the center, e6 played, and I think that is now key to white winning this game. The king going to e2, and then the rook coming now and trying to contest the open file. Okay, should he take? Yes, takes, and there's the option. Let's force exchange of rooks. Okay, so now it's going to be very interesting, guys, because equal number of pieces, equal pawns. So where does all this come together for white? Let's see. Okay, force another exchange. But king comes to e7. He wants to gain some mileage there on the white king in the center. But very, very interesting move, bishop c5. Talk to me, guys. Why play bishop c5? Why not have the straightforward exchange? Surely now, if with all those exchanges happening, there's that pawn that's going to be on its own on c5.
No, white wants black to exchange because after all the pieces come off and he plays b4, he'll have a protected pass pawn on c5.
Yeah.
And he
Senzi?
can win that.
Yeah, I also go with the pass pawn. I agree as well.
Yes. When we are equal, the idea is, in the end game, try to create a pass pawn. All right, and that will win you the game. So black refutes the exchange, plays a6, and that's a very strong move b4. Suddenly they're switching to the king side as well, and now there's your pass pawn still happening. Okay, knight to b8. Let's first simplify, but no, black doesn't want to exchange. There is also the strong knight to b4 coming up now. Look at that move, c6. Talk to me, guys. What are your thoughts on that move? Knight
I
being
actually
attacked?
saw this. I saw c6 when he played knight to b5. It's very clever because you can't take the knight because you play pawn to c7, and if the king tries to stop it from going to c8, you just take the knight, and if he moves the knight, you just go to c8 and get a queen.
Right. I'm just going to add to what you're saying, Raman. Thank you. c7. If the king now goes to d7, there's also the exchange of f takes e6. King cannot stop both pawns at the same time. Agree?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, so there you go. F takes e6, which I predicted. Knight takes. And now look at that. There's your pawn sacrifice coming on move number 32. Senzi, I need your comment on that move. E4, what are your thoughts?
E4. Trying to analyze.
Either way, Senzi, whether white takes it, the pawn or not.
Yeah.
Whether black takes the pawn or not. Either way, white is going to end up with a connected pass pawn.
Okay. Yeah, so my only worry is those two pawns on A5 and B5. Otherwise, I was saying that's the only thing I was actually looking at to say. Yes,
Yeah.
it's connected pawns, but you can also advance on that side.
I understand your concern here of this going, these two pawns, but this king is able to come across. If the king was a bit further on the king's side, then it would have been a problem. But I do not think that there will be enough time. Okay, so let's see. Takes, and there we go. And there your pawns go. Interesting. So there's the H pawn that can also now run. Okay. It's the tortoise and the hare. So it's clearly white's pawns are running faster. All right. Guys, so you can see the critical pawn sacrifice there came very late in the game on move number 32. Okay, you can actually understand why I also included in-game pawn sacrifices here. All right, any comments? Can I move on? All right, next game is a game played between Capablanca again, former world champion, playing against Frank Marshall. Game played in 1909. Frank Marshall was a very, very attacking player. We have a few openings and few variations named after him. Most notably, one of my favorite lines of attack, which stems from the Rai Lopez. You heard of the Marshall attack. So that's the guy, Frank Marshall, that initiated that that variation. So let's see. In this game, I want you guys to notice more the pawn roller concept. Okay, coming back to pawn structures. Rawan, Queen's Gambit, or shall we go with the Namza Indian?
No, this is not a Namza Indian. Doesn't the Namza Indian need knight f6 and then bishop b5? B4.
Yeah, bishop b4, yes. So
yeah.
In this case, with that move there, c5, it is.
This is the Tarrasch, I think.
Okay, but it is the Queen's Gambit. It's one of those.
Gambit. Yeah.
One of those variations. All right. Interestingly, take note of the exchanges here, because if white had to now take C takes D takes c4, black gets an early isolated queen's pawn, which was one of our topics a few weeks ago. All right. Knight f3 played. I'm just rolling forward quickly. Nothing in it at this stage. Notice the reluctance to exchange those D and C pawns. Hey, no, man. Okay, so there we go. Bishop g5, knight to e4. Notice, is that a good idea, players? Would you go for that early exchange, considering that there's a fianchetto bishop there?
No, because the pawn would be weak.
Yeah, it will be weak, but there's the option of playing f5 to support it, or to bring your bishop to d5. But either way, it is extremely risky. Okay, here's the exchanges, and white does the same. Obviously, now white is planning to play f4 if allowed to do so. And now, why did black not choose to take the pawn on e4? Quite interesting. I mean, he surely could have then equalized his. White could have taken the pawn on e4. He's a pawn down. So if he had taken bishop takes e4, then surely it would have been equal.
The White thinks he can take it at any point in time and would rather get rid of the knight that's on d4, the powerful center knight.
Agreed, because the pawn on e4 is already vulnerable, as we agreed. But now he's still, look at this, he doesn't take it on e4, and he takes it on f3.
Yeah, that helps develop his queen.
Correct, and there's a strong diagonal attack there, and also now it doesn't allow the bishop, the black bishop, to come d5 to build up some type of counter there. All right, so let's see. I mean, there's nothing in the game at this stage. You'd ask yourself, why are they playing rook c3, making some other moves? They're just basically sussing each other out. Even there's a patient move with the bishop. I thought that the queen might swing across here to h4 as a possibility. Okay. And there the bishop goes back again, forcing exchanges, but the queen didn't want to exchange. Okay, so now, what strategy, the question remains, what strategy do you adopt to win the game? Black ended up winning this game, so now we need to see how he manages to do that. Okay, Black on the one hand, he's got a queenside pawn majority. White on the other hand has got an extra center pawn. All right, so in the end game, you tend to have to play very technically sound, and the slightest miscalculation gets you into deep trouble. A5 certainly looks like an extremely threatening move. I think we all know that B4 is being planned. There we go. So now the pressure is on for white as regards the queen side. Okay, bishop comes back to f3. Rook to b1, bishop e2. Okay. Do you think that the b3 move is correct, or should he have gone for c3?
C3, the sacrificing that pawn. So instead of capturing, he would just advance with the b pawn.
Okay, I agree. That might have been a consideration because
I think after c3, b takes c3, you actually play bishop, bishop to b3.
Bishop to b3 then would come. Or even f4. F5,
F4,
eh?
yeah. That's its own option, yes.
So that's the reason why I asked that question. And after that, surely if the rook moves, then you take. If the rook goes there, then you take that way. And then you've got a clear passage. Okay, so then after the check there, the rook will just come to c8. But interestingly now, Black chose b3. So let's see. Okay, and there c3 comes. So in other words, I mean, he kept the bishop, he retained the bishop at e6 to protect on b3, which I think was a bit of a longer route, because now after the exchanges, you'd want to think that he's going to take on b3, but there he gets a clear passage. But now he's giving it off again. What is Black really doing? Okay, So he gains the piece. He was more focused on gaining the bishop. But now it's the bishop for 2 pawns. Okay. Can you guys see a possible checkmate plan coming up? G4 stopped it. Notice that black is not completely worried at all here. I mean, we felt that he could get away here with one of these pass pawns, but he was not interested in that. And there you have a strong outpost, and it's just a matter of time. Almost a checkmate position arising there. The king is being cramped, and now after that, he resigns because it's going to be king h6 and rook h3 checkmate. Okay, comments or questions, guys? All right, the final game that I want to go through very quickly is, I took it out of the recent book that was launched by Dr. Lyndon Bauer, one of our more prominent players in Western Province, playing for Steiner's Chess Club. And this game, I thought kind of fitted in with the theme. He ended up losing this game. It was one of the games that was played in the 1989, if I recall. I wrote it down. Sorry, 1987. It was played in the Eastern Cape school trials, where Lyndon was originally from the Eastern Cape. So he lost this game, but there was a very interesting pawn sacrifice. Lyndon playing with the black pieces here. Sicilian defense coming up. Okay, so that's just the standard variation that we see. We've all grown used to that. Okay, very interesting that this player, that his opponent, Colin Dorsap, played that h4 move. And we're going to later on see why. Right, with bishop g5, e5 gets played. Knight e5, knight takes, pawn takes, and now there's a strategy. Black adopts, thinking he gains the pawn. Okay, and there he gains the pawn. So that is a pawn sacrifice. However, look what happens from here on in. Lyndon says this game was a huge learning curve for him. Not to be greedy to gain a pawn, but also not to underestimate your opponent. If we look at a queen to e2 followed, black castled. Is that a good idea? Look at the current position, guys. This bishop here on d3, what does it remind you of, Rowan? There's a certain
like the
opening. The Greek gift sacrifice, correct. Senzi, are you familiar with the Greek gift sacrifice?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I think it's obvious. I mean, look at black. Black could have castled queenside. I think you might have been slightly better off, in spite of the open file. But look at this. He's castled right into trouble because he doesn't have any defense. There's no knight. There's nothing happening here on the queen side. So give me the next move for white.
Bishop takes
Bishop
H7.
takes.
Bishop takes H7, yes. All the criteria are there. You have the rook on H1, bishop pointing at H7. So here we go. Knight to G5 definitely coming up. And H5. And I think many players tend to forget about that move. Okay, and there's your simple queenside castle. So now you think she's out of trouble because the bishop has removed the knight. Okay, but interestingly, he's not worried. Keeping the bishop there. I mean, that's a huge plus. Okay, is black getting into trouble now? Or white getting into trouble? What do you guys think? What should the follow-up be?
I think I see a checkmate on f6 if bishop takes g5 and then goes to f6.
Correct. Yes. So Ravan is saying, let's do that. If bishop takes here, then there's your checkmate.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, Ravan. Well spotted. So black saw that plan. Okay. And now take the rook if you want to take the rook. First chases the queen away. And now I think once again f6 is being threatened. Do you agree, Ravan?
Yeah, f6 is being threatened again with the queen.
And
the
then it's
bishop.
again going to be checkmate. So bishop comes back. And then the queen takes theirs, check. So black is hanging in there, eh? He's hanging
Barely.
in. He's barely. But now it's still going to all happen. Okay, I was thinking even, I mean, white could even want to play G7 if he wants to as an option.
Yeah, and bring the other rook to g1.
Yeah, or he could even go rook D7. So
yeah.
there we go. Rook to D7. So now the queen, importantly, is protecting on G7. But that's not enough. Look at that. All right. I think that was quite an embarrassing checkmate there, eh?
Yeah, that was a fun
Okay,
game.
and it all started with the pawn sacrifice here in the center. And that's the reason why I actually chose that game just to round it off, because that was typical. I mean, that was typical middle game, actually right at the start of the middle game. All right, guys, so just come to recap. We looked at the pawn sacrifice, middle game, end game. Our concepts that we basically touched on was the idea of outposts, importance of pawn structure. We saw shutting out of pieces from the opponent. We saw having that plan A and plan B, and we saw just pawn rollers happening and so forth. But clearly there were some provocative moves being made, trying to entice the opponents. And then something that you can also take out from all the games that we looked at was when it came to exchanges, there was the question of keeping the tension and recognizing forced or unforced exchanges. Okay, any final comments from you guys?
No, I think that you explained it very well. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. Okay, thanks guys for your attendance tonight. We look forward to you joining us again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Enjoy your
Andrew.
evening further.
Thank you,
Enjoy.
Andrew.
All right. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, have a good evening, everyone.